There are certain things a mother never expects to hear from her child, especially not with the whole family listening. That Sunday, as sunlight slanted through Helen's lace curtains and the chatter of relatives bounced off the walls, Rosie leaned in close, her voice barely above a breath. "Mommy, it hurts when I sit. If I hadn't been so busy passing the mashed potatoes, I might have missed it entirely." But something about the way she pressed her lips together, how her hands knotted in her lap, made the world slow down for just a second. Family gatherings at my mother's house always felt like stepping back into a sepia photograph. Helen's living room was a time capsule, old quilts, faded Bible verses in wooden frames, the scent of lemon polish and Sunday roast. Every side table overflowed with casserole dishes borrowed from church, steam rising as folks helped themselves and swapped stories. In Indiana, these meals weren't just about food. They were about ritual, about keeping up appearances, about everyone playing the part they'd been given. Rosie never quite fit that script. Last year, she'd fidgeted at the table, tapping her feet, twisting her dress. "She's just difficult," my mother had said, loud enough for the aunts to nod. I'd laughed it off then, embarrassed, brushing her hair behind her ear and telling her to settle down. But this year, something was different, something in her eyes I couldn't ignore. As the afternoon unfolded, I watched Rosie avoid Travis's side of the table. She hovered near the kitchen doorway, casting anxious glances at the family as they filled their plates. When Helen called her over, Rosie hesitated, then took the seat nearest me instead. Chelsea shot me a look, one of those sideways glances sisters reserve for moments when they think you're coddling your child. "She'll never toughen up if you don't make her sit with the others," she whispered, careful not to let the words carry. Travis, always the joker, chuckled from the far end. "Hey, Rosie, wanna swap places? I promise not to steal your biscuit." Rosie's shoulders hunched, and she looked away. My mother, ever the gracious host, filled the silence with talk of church bake sales and next Sunday's potluck. The world, it seemed, wanted things to be easy. Midway through dinner, as forks clinked and laughter rolled across the table, I noticed Rosie drawing quietly in her lap. She'd brought her little notebook again, her safe place. Peeking over, I saw rough sketches of a chair covered in jagged spikes. I felt a chill crawl up my arms, remembering how, just weeks earlier, she'd started insisting on standing at meals, claiming her legs were tired. Helen didn't pay the sketch any mind. "She's always been a sensitive child," she said to Mrs. Jennings, who nodded with the tired resignation of a neighbor who's seen every family drama unfold over decades. Chelsea, meanwhile, leaned in and whispered, "You're spoiling her, Margot. She's got to learn the world isn't gentle." The conversation drifted discipline, the good old days, how kids today have it so easy. The room filled with the sound of approval and memory, but I saw Rosie shrink at every burst of laughter, her fork untouched. Travis reached over for a bread roll, and Rosie's hand jerked away so fast she nearly dropped her cup. No one else seemed to notice, but my heart thudded in my chest. Pastor Dennis, stopping by on his way to evening service, offered a prayer over dessert, asking for wisdom and kindness in our families. As he spoke, I caught Rosie watching me, her eyes wide and glassy. I squeezed her hand under the table, trying to pass her some comfort I wasn't sure I still possessed. And then it happened, so suddenly the whole room froze. Rosie, pale and trembling, set her fork down and pressed her hands between her knees. "It hurts," she cried, the words sharp as broken glass. The chatter collapsed into stunned silence. For a long, aching moment, no one moved. Then Helen stood, face set, and scooped Rosie up. "She needs a minute," she said, ushering her granddaughter out of the room as though brushing away an inconvenient spill. All eyes turned to me. I could feel the weight of their judgment, the unspoken questions. Chelsea broke the silence first, her voice clipped. "You really ought to set firmer boundaries, Margot." Travis muttered something under his breath, and Mrs. Jennings quietly offered to help clear the plates. I followed after Helen, finding her in the hallway as she tried to coax Rosie into sitting on the floral sofa. "She's overtired. That's all." My mother's tone left no room for argument. But I knelt in front of Rosie, gently helping her slip her shoes back on. Her hands shook as she laced them up. As I knelt beside her, she leaned in, barely audible. "You promise you won't be mad?" My heart squeezed. "I promise," I whispered, though every part of me wanted to run, to cry, to scream. I wished, in that moment, that life in the Midwest really was as simple as potluck suppers and Sunday sermons. That the biggest troubles were burned casseroles or a flat tire on the way to church. But behind the laughter and the rituals, I saw the walls we built, the ones that kept our doubts in, and our children's pain out. That night, as I loaded Rosie into the car and waved goodbye to the neighbors, the sky hung low and gray. I glanced at her in the rearview mirror, her face turned to the window, silent. The drive home was quiet, filled only with the hum of the heater and the occasional sniffle. Sometimes I think families don't hear the whispers that matter most, not because we're deaf, but because we're afraid of what they might mean. But now, holding Rosie's small hand in mine, I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. Not this time. Mourning in a small town has a particular quiet to it, a hush broken only by the gurgle of the coffee maker and the low hum of the refrigerator. I moved through my little kitchen on autopilot, laying out cereal and apple slices, still half listening to the radio's weather report. It was just Rosie and me at the table, the light outside not fully awake, the kind of autumn morning that made everything seem softer except, somehow, the coldness running down my spine. Pinned right next to my grocery list on the fridge, Rosie's new crayon drawing stared at me. The paper was jagged along one edge, torn in a hurry. The scene was simple, a little girl, stick-thin, perched on a chair surrounded by sharp, angry lines. Her mouth was a blue oval, open in a silent cry. It chilled me deeper than any draft sneaking under the back door. I remembered last week, the car ride home from Helen's house. Rosie had stared out the window, clutching her raccoon plushie, and mumbled, "I don't want to play the quiet game at Grandma's anymore." At the time, I'd smoothed her hair and promised we'd talk about it later. Later came and went. I wanted to believe it was just a phase, a child's way of acting out in a world full of rules she didn't like. But that morning, as I watched Rosie gingerly lower herself onto her chair, I felt my denial crumbling. She winced, lips pressed tight, eyes darting away from mine when I asked if she was all right. "I'm fine," she whispered, spooning cereal with her left hand, as if afraid her right would betray some secret. I wanted to pretend everything was normal. So I filled the thermos with hot chocolate, double-checked her backpack for library books, and tried to laugh off the knot in my chest. But when I went to tidy her room, I found another drawing stuffed under her pillow, a scribbled scene of a tall, shadowy figure looming behind a stick girl. The words "be good" were scrawled in Rosie's uneven print. My hands shook as I folded it, wondering if I was reading too much into a child's artwork or not enough. Mrs. Jennings knocked as I was wiping crumbs from the counter, her usual cheery hello replaced by a cautious smile. She was carrying her empty flour tin, the same one she'd borrowed for every pie since we moved in. "Morning, Margot. Mind if I top this off?" She followed me into the kitchen, her eyes scanning the cluttered counters, the school papers, the refrigerator gallery. She stopped short at Rosie's drawing, her mouth pinching into a line. "Rosie's been busy with her crayons, huh?" she said softly. I saw her fingers hesitate at the edge of the fridge, as if she might touch the paper but thought better of it. My niece used to draw all kinds of things when she was little. Sometimes they mean something. Sometimes it's just their way of sorting out the world. She didn't say more, but her eyes lingered on the Bluemouth stick girl. After she left, Rosie shuffled into the kitchen, pajamas too big and hair a wild halo. She stopped at the table, looking at me with a question in her eyes I wasn't sure I wanted to answer. I tried to sound cheerful. "Cereal or toast this morning, sweetheart?" "Cereal," she said, sliding into her chair with a grimace. I watched her for a moment, noting the way she shifted her weight, avoiding the center of the seat. I felt like a detective in my own home, piecing together clues I didn't want to find. Rosie's eyes flicked to the fridge, then back to her bowl. "If I did something bad, would you still love me?" she asked, voice small, shaky. My heart dropped straight to the soles of my feet. I knelt beside her chair, brushing a stray lock from her cheek. "Rosie, there's nothing you could ever do to make me stop loving you. Nothing, you hear me?" She nodded, but I could see the doubt flicker in her eyes, a storm cloud passing over a field. She finished her breakfast in silence. I packed her lunch, PB&J cut into triangles, just the way she liked it, and tucked a note inside. "You are my sunshine," I wrote, even as my hands trembled. Rosie slipped her shoes on without a word and hugged her raccoon tight before we left for school. After drop-off, I returned to the stillness of the kitchen, the smell of toast now cold and uninviting. I looked again at the drawings, tracing the jagged lines with my fingertip, searching for answers in crayon that wouldn't come. Mrs. Jennings' words circled my mind, the unsaid lingering heavier than her pie tin. That night, after Rosie was asleep, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table, notebook open, laptop glowing softly in the dark. I typed in search after search, signs of trauma in children, how to talk to your child about secrets, nightmares, and art in kids. The words blurred together, but one phrase kept jumping out. Listen to what isn't being said. I wrote down every little thing Rosie had said or drawn these last few weeks, her flinches, her whispers, the games she didn't want to play. The more I wrote, the more afraid I became that I'd missed something important, that in my desire for normalcy, I'd let something terrible slip by. The house felt too big and too quiet. From the next room, Rosie murmured in her sleep, soft and unintelligible. I closed my eyes and prayed, not in any formal way, just a mother's plea to the universe. Let me be strong enough to hear the truth, whatever it is. Sometimes, in small towns like ours, the walls talk louder than the people inside them. We cling to our routines, flour tins exchanged, radio humming, casserole dishes washed and returned. But in the hush of my kitchen, surrounded by crayon warnings and the gentle tick of the clock, I understood. Love isn't just about keeping your child safe. Sometimes, it's about daring to face what you most want to deny. And so I sat there, notebook in hand, as the night pressed in, searching for the courage to listen not just to Rosie's words, but to the whispers hiding behind them. If you keep coddling her, she'll grow up even more difficult, Mom scolded, slicing the banana bread with a firmness that made the loaf look defiant. The knife cut through the golden crust, releasing a smell that wrapped around the kitchen like a memory you can't quite escape. I watched the crumbs scatter, my hands wrapped around a mug of coffee gone lukewarm. It was the sort of morning that, in childhood, I'd have called perfect. Sun filtering through Helen's kitchen curtains, radio set to an oldies station, the world moving just slow enough that nothing felt urgent. Except now, I was the mother, and nothing felt easy at all. Rosie sat at the end of the table, coloring quietly. She pressed hard with her crayons, focused, her tongue poking out at the corner of her mouth. Now and then, she'd glance at the window, where the breeze rattled the cornstalks in the field beyond. Every so often, she'd look at me, searching for something, a question, an answer, maybe just the comfort of knowing she wasn't alone in the room. I flashed back to when I was Rosie's age, sitting at this same table, fighting back tears after falling off my bike. "Don't cry," Helen would say, wiping dirt from my knees. "Be tough. Tough girls make it through." The words were meant to be loving, I suppose. But I remembered how they pressed down on my chest, how I learned to swallow pain so no one else had to taste it. This morning, Helen's patience was as thin as her smile. "You can't keep giving in, Margot. Let her sit with the grown-ups. Let her play outside, like we did." I wanted to tell her that the world wasn't the same anymore, that Rosie's struggles weren't fixed by a scraped knee and a Band-Aid. But the words stuck, as if my own childhood silences had taken root. To break the tension, Helen chirped, "How about the Harvest Festival this weekend? It'll cheer Rosie up." Her voice was too bright, like someone holding up a flashlight to ward off the dark. "There'll be hayrides, caramel apples, maybe even a petting zoo. All the families will be there." I forced a smile for Rosie's sake. She looked up from her coloring, her eyes uncertain, then quickly returned to the safety of her paper. "That sounds fun, doesn't it, sweetheart?" I coaxed, but Rosie only shrugged, shading her drawing with short, fierce strokes. Helen poured more coffee, shaking her head. "You always were sensitive, Margot. I just wish you'd let things go." Her words brushed the air like an apology she wasn't sure she owed. Later, after packing up leftovers, I watched Rosie trace her finger along the kitchen wallpaper, studying the faded bluebells. She pressed her raccoon plushie to her chest, keeping her voice small. "Will there be a lot of people at the festival?" "Probably," I said gently. "But we'll stay together." "I promise." She nodded, not quite reassured, her shoulders curling inward. On the day of the festival, the whole town seemed to show up. Booths lined the church parking lot, kids darted between hay bales, and the scent of fried dough hung thick in the crisp air. Helen was in her element, greeting neighbors, laughing too loudly at old jokes, waving to Mrs. Jennings across the cider stand. Rosie stuck close, her grip on my hand tightening as we moved through the crowd. The music from the high school band was cheerful, but Rosie flinched at every sudden burst of applause. Chelsea arrived with Travis, all smiles and matching scarves, carrying caramel apples for the kids. "Rosie, look." "Your favorite," Chelsea called out, but Rosie shook her head, staring at the ground. Pastor Dennis, broad-shouldered and warm-voiced, spotted us near the hayride. "There's my favorite little artist," he boomed, bending down to Rosie's level. "Did you draw anything special this week?" Before I could answer, Rosie let out a sob, wrenching her hand from mine. She pressed herself against my side, face hidden in my coat. The laughter around us faded, replaced by a ripple of whispers. Helen's face blanched, her jaw set. "Margot, what on earth?" I knelt, wrapping Rosie in my arms, whispering, "You're okay, I've got you." She shook, her breath hiccuping against my shoulder, eyes squeezed shut. "Can we go home now?" she pleaded. Helen tried to recover the moment, laughing nervously as she explained to Mrs. Jennings and Pastor Dennis, "She's just been shy lately. Maybe too much sugar." But I saw the judgment flicker in the neighbor's eyes, the way folks here measure a mother's worth by her child's composure. We left the festival early, Rosie silent the whole drive. I watched her in the rearview mirror, the festival's lights fading behind us. At home, I tucked her into bed, brushing her hair back as she curled around her raccoon. She didn't ask for a story, just whispered, "Don't turn the light off." Helen called that night, her voice brittle with worry and pride. "You have to let this go, Margot. She'll outgrow it, but you're making it worse." I bit back my frustration, mumbling that I'd try. But just after midnight, I felt the mattress dip. Rosie crawled in beside me, trembling, her small fingers searching for my hand. "Can I stay with you tonight?" she whispered. I held her close, listening to the distant sound of the wind rattling the cornfields, thinking of all the ways silence travels in a family. Sometimes, difficult is easier to accept than broken. But lying there with Rosie pressed to my side, I wondered how much longer I could pretend that was enough. "Mommy, do all secrets make you feel sick inside?" Rosie asked, her voice trembling, eyes fixed on the worn paw of her raccoon plush. The sun peeked through the blinds, dust motes floating in the light. Sunday morning used to be my favorite time, pancakes, soft gospel on the radio, a sense of peace you could almost taste. Now, everything seemed thinner, the comfort worn away by invisible cracks. Her question pulled me back to being her age, holding in tears over secrets I didn't have words for, fears that grown-ups brushed away as silly or dramatic. I remembered how heavy those secrets felt, like stones in my stomach. I didn't want that weight for Rosie. "Some secrets do," I said quietly, smoothing her hair. "Especially the ones we keep because we're scared." Rosie nodded, but her lips pressed tight, the way she does when she's fighting backwards. Sunday mornings had a rhythm of their own. Rosie usually loved helping me choose her dress, but today she dragged her feet, refusing every option. "It's too scratchy," she protested. "Too bright. Too cold." Finally, she settled on a faded yellow sundress, insisting on wearing her sneakers instead of shiny shoes. We walked to church, the neighborhood humming with lawn mowers and the distant clang of the old church bell. Inside, the familiar smell of coffee and floral perfume greeted us, but I noticed Rosie shrink when she saw Pastor Dennis by the entrance. His voice boomed with his usual cheer. "Good morning, Margot. And there's Rosie, ready for Sunday school." Rosie flinched, clinging to my skirt. "She's a little tired," I offered, forcing a smile. Pastor Dennis crouched, his tie brushing the carpet. "I've heard she's been having a tough time listening lately," he said with a wink. "Attitude runs in the family, I suppose." He tried to ruffle her hair, but Rosie jerked away, her shoulders drawn up tight. Inside the sanctuary, the light slanted through stained glass, painting the pews in jewel tones. I sat beside Rosie, watching her hands twist in her lap. During the hymn, I saw faint purple marks around her wrist, shadows of bruises I hadn't noticed before. My mind spun. Was it from the playground? From grabbing a doorknob too hard? Or something else I hadn't dared to name? When it was time for Sunday school, Rosie refused to let go of my hand. "I don't want to go," she whispered. "Not today." Mrs. Evans, the Sunday school teacher, offered a gentle smile. "Sometimes a little extra love is what a girl needs," she said, ushering the other children inside. I let Rosie sit beside me through the sermon, her raccoon clutched to her chest. Back home, I set Rosie up with crayons at the kitchen table and sat at my laptop, searching for answers in the quiet clatter of keys. I found a single mom's forum, threads of women telling stories about children whose pain was dismissed, teachers who didn't listen, family who made excuses, mothers who second-guessed themselves until it was too late. I read until my eyes stung, my own doubt swelling with every post. Rosie hummed softly, drawing circles on the paper. I glanced over and saw her sketching the church pews, everyone seated, heads bowed. She'd drawn herself small, off to the side, alone. The sight made my heart ache. "Sweetie, is there something you want to tell me?" I asked, my voice careful, like stepping onto thin ice. Rosie's pencil paused mid-stroke. She looked up, her eyes wide and full of questions. She hesitated. "I don't like it when Pastor Dennis looks at me," she murmured. "He's too loud." I nodded, tucking that away, but something in her tone said there was more. Later that afternoon, as I folded laundry in the bedroom, Rosie hovered in the doorway. "Mommy," she began, almost too soft to hear. "Do I have to be alone with Uncle Travis if I don't want to?" The world seemed to stop. My hands froze mid-fold, a shirt slipping from my fingers. "No, sweetheart. You never have to be alone with anyone you don't want to," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. Rosie's shoulders dropped, as if I'd lifted a heavy weight off her back. She inched closer, pressing her raccoon to her chin. "He tells me to play quiet games. I don't want to play." My heart pounded. All the half-formed fears, the whispers I tried to ignore, came roaring into focus. I remembered how Helen had dismissed every concern as just a phase, and how I'd wanted to believe her. But now, looking at Rosie, her thin arms, her brave, worried eyes, I knew I couldn't ignore the signs. I couldn't call this a phase, couldn't hope it would pass on its own. I had to act. That night, after tucking Rosie in, I stood at the kitchen sink, staring into the dark yard. My phone sat heavy in my palm. For years, it had been my lifeline to the outside world, a tool for grocery lists, for birthday reminders, for photos of Rosie smiling in the summer sun. Now, it felt like a lifeline of a different sort. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name, Rebecca James. She was a family lawyer I'd met once during a hospital volunteer event. Warm, sharp, a woman who'd told me to call if I ever needed advice. My thumb hovered over the call button, doubts swirling. What if I was overreacting? What if this tore the family apart for nothing? But then I remembered Rosie's voice. "Do all secrets make you feel sick inside?" I pressed the button, listening to the phone ring, heart in my throat. Rebecca answered, her voice calm and steady. "Margot? It's been a while, are you all right?" I took a deep breath and began to tell her the story, every detail I'd held back for too long. Outside, the night air pressed against the window, the quiet broken only by Rosie's soft breathing from down the hall. For a moment, I missed the comfort of old routines, the church dresses, the sweet tang of grape juice from communion, the soft hush of hymns. But those comforts belonged to another life, one where I could pretend nothing was wrong. I always believed I could spot pain in my child's eyes. I thought no bruise, no secret, no shadow could slip past a mother's gaze. But I never imagined my own Rosie, once so open, so unguarded, would learn to hide her hurt behind a tired, practiced smile. I thought about that as I sat in the school pickup lane, watching the slow parade of parents and minivans. It was art day, which Rosie usually loved. But lately, she'd started requesting early pickups, always with the same excuse. Tired, a headache, can I just go home? I tried to tell myself it was just autumn settling in, the shorter days wearing us both down. Still, the knot in my stomach wouldn't loosen. The school, with its bright bulletin boards and the smell of crayon and sanitizer, felt familiar. There were photos taped to the lockers, gaps where lost mittens had been claimed, lunchboxes lined up by the door, backpacks trailing long strings. In another life, these things would have comforted me, proof of belonging to a safe, ordinary world. Mrs. Jennings waved as I walked in, balancing a stack of library books. She offered a thin smile and a knowing nod. "Rosie's in the art room, Margot. They're finishing collages." I thanked her, heart pounding, and made my way down the hall. Through the glass window, I saw Rosie hunched over a table, scissors in hand, eyes trained on her work. Travis, always eager to help, stood nearby, talking too loudly, his laughter echoing off the linoleum floors. "Rosie, your mom's here early," he called, reaching out. Rosie stiffened, pulling her shoulders tight, and when he bent down to hug her goodbye, she flinched so quickly anyone else might have missed it. But I saw. The way her body locked up, the way her face went blank for half a second before she forced a smile and waved him away. I caught her eye and gave a gentle wave. "Ready, honey?" I asked, keeping my voice light. She nodded, packing her bag in a hurry. I noticed her art project abandoned, a half-finished collage of a playground with stick figures standing apart. One tiny figure, drawn in red, sat alone on a bench. As we walked out, Mr. Calvin, the principal, stepped into the hallway. He was a kind man, balding, always cheerful, the sort of person who remembered every child's name. "Margot, a word," he said, quietly pulling me aside as Rosie waited at the door. He lowered his voice. "Rosie's a bright kid. Polite, but she's been quieter than usual. She sometimes sits out during group activities, prefers the reading corner. Anything going on at home?" I forced a smile. "We've had a lot of changes. New routines. Maybe she's just shy." He nodded, but his eyes lingered, searching for answers I wasn't ready to give. Rosie tugged my sleeve as we left. "Can we go straight home?" she whispered, voice trembling. On the drive, she stared out the window, counting trees, lips moving in silent rhythm. I glanced over, searching for the right words. "Did you have a good day?" I tried. She shrugged. It was okay. She pressed her raccoon plush to her chin, a habit she'd returned to lately. I remembered telling Helen, not long ago, Rosie never used to flinch when I brushed her hair. Now she avoided even that small touch, retreating into herself in ways I'd never seen. At home, as I unpacked her backpack, a crumpled drawing fell out. I smoothed it on the kitchen counter. The picture was simple, just a stick girl on a bench, red marks slashing across her legs. My chest tightened. In the corner, a tall figure loomed, drawn in gray, labeled T. Off to the side, smaller stick figures looked away, faces blank. I felt my breath catch, heart pounding loud in my ears. Rosie hovered in the doorway, eyes wide. "It's just a drawing," she whispered, from recess. But her fingers twisted the hem of her shirt, and I saw the way her gaze flicked to the door, as if expecting someone else to come through. "Rosie, does anything at school make you feel scared?" I asked as gently as I could. She shook her head quickly, then paused, lips trembling. "I just don't like loud people," she mumbled, turning away. Later, while she napped curled in a sunbeam on the living room carpet, I sat at the table, staring at her drawing, my mind racing. How many times had I dismissed my own instincts, telling myself I was overreacting? I'd always believed that mothers could spot the truth by looking into their child's eyes. But now I realized There are some hurts you can't see, not until the pain is too much for even a tired smile to hide. As dusk settled, the house filled with small reminders of our life. Rosie's lunchbox still open on the counter, her school photo taped crookedly to the fridge, a pair of mittens missing their match. Our little community felt both comforting and blinding, everyone knowing just enough to guess, but never asking too much. After dinner, I watched Rosie flinch again when Travis's name came up on TV, her fork frozen halfway to her mouth. I reached over and squeezed her hand. She didn't say a word, but I felt her lean into the touch. That night, after tucking her in, I stared at my phone for a long time. Finally, with a shaky hand, I texted Rebecca. "I think it's time to talk, really talk." I knew, as I set the phone down and sat quietly in the dark, that there was no going back to innocence. From now on, I would be the mother who watched closely, listened harder, and refused to let my child's pain stay hidden. I would not ignore this, not anymore. Rosie woke me at 2 a.m., gentle as a feather, her whisper close to my ear. "Mommy, please don't make me go back." The world was silent, except for the low hum of traffic through the cracked window and the soft tick of the hallway clock. For a moment, I thought I'd dreamed it, but there she was, wide-eyed in her pajamas, clutching her raccoon plush, cheeks damp with worry. I pulled her into bed beside me, heart aching. "You're safe, baby. I promise. No one's making you go anywhere tonight." She shivered under the quilt, pressing herself close, as if hiding inside the curve of my body might be enough to keep all the shadows away. Rebecca's words echoed in my mind from a call days earlier. Kids speak in signs before they ever use words. I saw those signs everywhere now, in Rosie's shrinking posture, her sudden terror at the mention of certain names, the way she scanned every room as if mapping escape routes. "I don't want to be alone with Uncle Travis or anyone who plays the quiet game," she whispered, the words nearly tripping over themselves. I smoothed her hair and let her talk, fighting the urge to fill every silence with reassurances I wasn't sure I believed anymore. My guilt gnawed at me. Had I missed all this before? Had I let fear or the wish for normalcy blind me to her pain? In the weak glow of my bedside lamp, I watched Rosie's eyes flutter closed, her hand curled tight around mine. I vowed, right then, not to ignore another sign. After she drifted off, I sat up in the living room, wrapped in an old sweater, notebook open in my lap. I began to write every odd bruise, every drawing, every note from her teachers, even the stories she whispered late at night. I made columns, date, what happened, what Rosie said, what I noticed. My writing was shaky at first, like someone learning a new language. But as I filled page after page, I started to feel steadier, like documenting her world might be the first step toward changing it. The next morning, still running on little sleep, I called Rebecca James. The phone rang twice before her calm, practiced voice answered. "Margot, is everything all right?" I swallowed hard, feeling my throat tighten. "I need help," I said quietly. "Rosie finally told me, and I think something happened. She's scared of Travis. She's scared of a lot of people." Rebecca didn't hesitate. "You're doing the right thing, Margot. But we need more than words. Start documenting everything. Every mark, every change in behavior. Keep a logbook, and don't throw away any of her drawings. Can you bring her to see a child psychologist? I know someone gentle, Dr. Callahan. She's good with kids, and she'll know how to talk with Rosie without pushing too hard." I scribbled the name down, blinking back tired tears. "Will the court even listen to me?" "To her," I whispered, letting all my fears hang in the air. Rebecca was quiet for a moment, then said, The truth matters, even when people want to ignore it. We'll build a case, Margot. Just keep loving Rosie and don't rush her. Let her talk when she's ready. I thanked her and hung up, my nerves sparking like a live wire. The apartment felt both too small and too big, filled with small comforts and haunting reminders that nothing would ever be quite normal again. That evening, after a dinner of chicken nuggets and carrot sticks, Rosie curled in my lap as I read her favorite bedtime story. When she asked for hot chocolate, I made it extra sweet, added the mini marshmallows she loved. We sipped in silence, the warmth of the mug grounding me, if only for a moment. When I tucked her into bed, she clung a little tighter. "Read it again?" she asked. So I did, voice steady and soft, even as my mind spun through lists of what to do next, what to watch for, how to keep her safe. After she fell asleep, I tidied up her room and found her tablet under the pillow. I turned it on to check for new drawings. Sometimes she used a coloring app before bed. But a recording app blinked at me, the red icon glowing. A single audio file, time-stamped for the day before, sat at the top of the list. Curious, I pressed play. At first, it was just static and soft shuffling, Rosie humming under her breath. Then, muffled but unmistakable, the voices of adults, angry, tense, not realizing they were being recorded. I recognized my own voice, strained. "She's just a child, Travis." She said no. A pause, then Travis's, low and insistent. "You're blowing this out of proportion. She needs to learn not to lie." There was a sound like a chair scraping, the shuffle of feet, a sharp intake of breath. Rosie's tiny voice, barely audible. "I want to go home." My hand shook as I pressed pause, the tablet screen glowing in the dark kitchen. It was all there, fear, denial, an adult trying to drown a child's voice. Suddenly, every bit of doubt, every moment I'd questioned myself, felt like a betrayal of Rosie's trust. I set the tablet down, heart pounding, knowing what I had to do. I added a new page to my logbook. Audio recording found, Rosie's tablet. Date, time, file saved. I emailed Rebecca, attaching the file. My message was short, my resolve absolute. "We need to talk. Urgent." Later, I lay awake in the hush, Rosie's quiet breathing filling the apartment. I pressed my forehead to hers and whispered a promise. "No more silence, Rosie. I will fight for you. I will listen. I will not let you down." For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself a sliver of hope, a belief that, together, we could break the cycle. The world outside was still dark, but here, in this small room, the silence was finally beginning to lift. The turkey was carved, the pie was cooling, and the house was filled with the smells of butter and sage, just like every Thanksgiving I could remember. But this year, something under the surface fell off, like a bruise hidden beneath a sweater, throbbing even as everyone smiled and passed the mashed potatoes. I'd spent the morning coaxing Rosie into her favorite blue dress, the one she picked for special days. She clung to my hand, thumb tracing the seam of her raccoon plush tucked into my purse. As we pulled up to Helen's house, the driveway was already packed, relatives unloading casseroles, cousins chasing each other across the yard, Mrs. Jennings balancing a pumpkin pie in each hand. Inside, the air was thick with tradition, Helen bustling between the kitchen and the dining room, her pearls shining, Chelsea fussing with the cranberry sauce, Travis pouring drinks, his voice too loud as he called the kids to the table. I caught Rosie staring at the long cedar table, eyes wide, jaw set. She hesitated on the threshold, pulling back when Travis reached to guide her to the end of the bench. Go on, Rosie, Helen urged, smoothing her apron. You know that's your spot, same as always. I felt Rosie's hand tighten in mine, her whole body trembling. I bent down. Where do you want to sit, honey? She looked up, her lips wobbling. Not at the end. Please, Mom. Don't make me. I heard Helen sigh. Margot, for heaven's sake, don't make a scene. The other adults pretended not to hear, except Mrs. Jennings, who caught my eye over her glasses. Is she all right, dear? She looks a little pale. I gave her a small, grateful nod. The table was set for a feast. Roasted vegetables, family recipes scribbled on stained index cards, the same blessing Helen recited every year. For health, for family, for peace. I could feel the irony prickling under my skin. The meal began as always, laughter, toasts, the clatter of forks on plates. But the tension crackled, sharp and invisible, as Rosie pressed against my side, refusing to let go. Just try a bite, Travis coaxed, his smile too wide. Rosie shrank from him, shaking her head. Rosie, you're being rude, Chelsea scolded, shooting me a look. This is family time. She's just tired, I managed, but my voice sounded thin, even to me. The conversation grew sharper. Helen steered the topic to school discipline, looking right at me. Kids these days, they need a firmer hand. If we let them run wild, they'll never learn. The others nodded, laughter forced and brittle. I felt sweat prick at my neck as I reached for Rosie's glass of water. She pushed her plate away, hands balled in her lap. Can we go home now? She whispered, barely audible over the din. Mrs. Jennings leaned over, her voice low. She really doesn't look well, Margot. Maybe you ought to let her rest. Helen huffed. Honestly, this is getting out of hand. For once, can we keep the peace? Something inside me snapped. I remembered Rosie begging, weeks ago, don't make me sit at the end of the table. How many times had I dismissed it as shyness, as just another phase? Suddenly, Rosie began to sob, loud, wrenching, the kind of crying that fills every corner of a room and makes everyone stop mid-sentence. The table fell silent. Forks frozen, glasses halfway to lips, every face turned to us. Helen stood up sharply. Rosie, what on earth? Rosie pushed back her chair, tears streaking down her cheeks. He hurts me, she shouted, her voice cracking. He hurts me and nobody listens. The room exploded. Chelsea's face went white. Travis stammered something. Helen's mouth opened and closed. Some relatives gasped. Others shook their heads in disbelief. Mrs. Jennings pressed a hand to her chest. Pastor Dennis, at the far end, tried to say something soothing, but his words were lost in the chaos. She's making it up. Travis protested, voice shaking. Kids say things they imagine. But I stood up, placing myself between Rosie and the table. Enough. My voice surprised even me, steady, strong. She's not making it up. I believe her. Helen glared, voice icy. Margot, this is not the time. No, Mom, I said, hands shaking but firm. This is exactly the time. Rosie clung to me, sobs still racking her tiny frame. Around us, the family fractured, some crying, some denying, some unable to meet my eyes. The traditions of gratitude and togetherness felt cruel in the face of such raw pain. My phone vibrated in my pocket, a silent reminder of what came next. With trembling hands, I picked it up. My thumb hovered over the keypad, the numbers 911 burning into my vision. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. The room seemed to shrink, the sounds muffled except for Rosie's quiet hiccups. Helen, voice quivering, pleaded, Margot, please, let's talk about this. Just us, Not here, not tonight. But I couldn't look away from my daughter or from the truth finally spoken aloud. Some silences, once broken, can never be stitched back together. The choice stood before me: keep the peace or protect my child. You'd destroy this family over a child's fantasy? Helen's voice trembled, but her words cut sharper than any knife. The sentence hung in the cold air of the foyer, echoing off the old wooden floorboards as if the house itself was judging me. The dining room behind us was a wasteland, plates abandoned, pie crusts left to harden, the remnants of Thanksgiving gratitude crumbling in the shadow of Rosie's cry. I knelt in the entryway, holding Rosie as she buried her face in my shoulder, her sobs growing quieter but no less desperate. The air seeping in from the porch chilled my skin, but the room felt hotter by the second. Helen blocked the front door, eyes wild, hands wringing her apron. Margot, think. She's upset, yes, but this is not the answer. We handle things as a family. She glanced behind her, as if expecting the ghosts of old relatives to nod their approval. Chelsea rushed over, eyes red, mascara smudged. Please, Margot. Rosie gets confused. You know how kids are. Don't do this. Don't ruin everything. Travis hovered near the staircase, face pale, voice shaking with false innocence. I swear, Margot, I would never hurt her. She's making it up. She needs help. This isn't right, none of it. Pastor Dennis stood near the coat rack, hands clasped, bowing his head. Let's pray for guidance. Unity is what holds a family together, even in trials. Rosie is a sensitive soul, but so much can be healed with faith and forgiveness. But I saw Mrs. Jennings at the edge of it all, one hand on her purse, eyes darting from me to Rosie, torn between custom and conscience. She opened her mouth to speak, closed it, and shifted from foot to foot, lips pressed in a thin, worried line. I felt every stare burning into my back. My chest tightened. I'd never felt so alone. All these people, my people, now seemed farther from me than strangers in a crowd. I wanted to yell, to shake them, to make them see the bruises Rosie hid and the terror in her voice. But I'd already said everything, and still, I was met with disbelief. Rosie trembled in my arms, whispering, I'm sorry, Mommy. I didn't want to ruin dinner. I hushed her, smoothing her hair, wishing I could shield her from all of it. Helen's face hardened. Margot, if you do this, you're not just hurting Travis. You're tearing this family apart. People will talk. What about your job? Your reputation? We'll never be able to come back from this. I looked at her, at all of them, and realized they'd rather preserve their image than protect my daughter. The pain of it was nearly physical, like a bruise blooming beneath my ribs. Chelsea's voice wobbled. You always have to be dramatic. Always have to make yourself the center of everything. Just, let's calm down. We'll talk to Rosie. She'll see it's just a misunderstanding. But Rosie shook her head, clinging tighter. No, Mommy. Please don't leave me. The weight of every childhood memory, being told to keep quiet, to forgive, to let it go, pushed against my back. But now it was my child's voice in my ear. My turn to choose. Rebecca's advice echoed. Document. Act. Don't let them silence her. I stood, pulling out my phone, thumb hovering over the numbers. My hand shook, but my voice was clear when I spoke. Rosie told the truth. I won't let her down. I'm calling the police. Helen's face collapsed in shock, her voice a hiss. If you do this, don't come back. You're no daughter of mine. Chelsea cried harder. Travis disappeared down the hall. Pastor Dennis muttered a prayer under his breath. Mrs. Jennings, finally, took a step forward, as if to say something, but stopped. I took a breath, dialing 911, pressing the phone to my ear. My free hand held Rosie tight. The call connected. My words came steady, shaped by weeks of fear and preparation. My name is Margot Parker. My daughter is in danger. I need help. The operator's voice was calm, practiced. She took my address, my explanation, promising someone would be there soon. I heard the click as the line disconnected, and all I could do was wait. The silence in the foyer stretched, broken only by Rosie's soft sniffles and the faint sound of dishes being stacked in the kitchen. Outside, the night was deep, cold stars glinting through the window. I could hear a siren in the distance, growing louder, a current of change sweeping toward us whether we wanted it or not. Helen retreated to the living room, face ashen. Chelsea leaned against the wall, arms folded, eyes full of betrayal. Pastor Dennis gathered his things, mumbling about faith being tested. Travis was nowhere to be seen. Rosie sat on my lap, head tucked under my chin, her breathing finally beginning to steady. I wrapped my arms around her and watched the red and blue lights flicker through the front window, painting stripes of color across the walls and the faces of the family I once thought would always be there. I knew, as the first uniformed figure appeared on the porch, that nothing would ever be the same. Family loyalty, I thought, is only as strong as the truth it protects. And when it shields the wrong people, it leaves the innocent out in the cold. The sirens stopped, doors opened, voices called out. Rosie looked up at me, her eyes searching mine. "Will you stay with me?" she whispered. "Always, baby," I promised, holding her as tightly as I ever had, knowing, finally, that protecting her was worth whatever it cost. The police arrived not with comfort, but with questions colder than the air swirling around Helen's porch. Their voices were measured, their faces set, as if this sort of thing happened every day, which, I realized with a pang, maybe it did. Blue and red lights painted the front of the house, the whole neighborhood suddenly awake and watching. "You can't unring a bell," I thought, as I held Rosie's small, trembling hand. The officers separated us in the living room, moving my family into corners as if we were chess pieces on a board. Helen tried to direct traffic. "I'll explain everything, officer." "This is all a misunderstanding," her voice brittle, pushing the boundaries of hospitality and control. Chelsea sobbed on the staircase, shoulders shaking, mascara running. Travis stood with his arms crossed, eyes red, shifting from one foot to the other, face like stone. One officer knelt to speak with Rosie, his badge gleaming in the lamplight. "Do you want to tell me what happened tonight?" His tone was gentle, but Rosie pressed against me, searching my face for reassurance. I nodded, feeling her fingers squeeze mine, her courage a fragile thing. I answered questions over and over. What did I see? What did Rosie say? When did I first notice a problem? Every word felt heavy, each answer pulled from the deepest part of me. I watched Helen grow paler as I described the bruises, the drawings, the nightmares. "Children exaggerate," she insisted, voice shaking. "She's had a hard year. We've all had a hard year." The CPS worker arrived, a woman named Ms. Alvarez, businesslike but kind. She explained, gently but firmly, that everyone needed to be interviewed separately, that Rosie would be asked questions in private. My heart lurched at the thought, but I remembered Rebecca's voice. "You're doing the right thing. Trust the process." In another room, Chelsea pleaded with the officers. "She's just anxious." Margot coddles her, feeds her fears. "You'll see, nothing happened." Travis denied everything, voice breaking at the edges. "I never touched her. I never would. She's confused. Margot put her up to this." But none of it mattered now, not their protests, not their anger, not their need for things to go back to the way they'd always been. There was no going back. When they finally allowed me to see Rosie again, she was sitting on the edge of her bed, knees pulled to her chest, staring at the hospital bag one officer had hastily packed for her: pajamas, toothbrush, raccoon plush, a coloring book. She looked up when I entered, eyes wide, asking without words if everything would ever be okay again. "We're going to the hospital, sweetheart," I told her, voice steady. "They're just going to make sure you're safe and healthy." Rosie nodded, her trust in me holding everything together as we walked out into the cold. Helen trailed us to the porch, blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders. "This isn't how families solve things, Margot. You've brought strangers into our home. You'll regret this." Her words cut, but I kept walking, Rosie's hand in mine. At the hospital, the lights were too bright and the chairs too stiff. Rosie clung to me while nurses in scrubs asked gentle questions, explained what would happen next. I signed papers I barely read, my signature shaky but resolute. Ms. Alvarez explained that during the exam, I couldn't be in the room. "She'll be with a specialist. You can wait right outside." "It's the law." Rosie's lip trembled. "Will you have to leave me?" she whispered, echoing a question she'd once asked during a bedtime story. My chest ached. "Just for a little while, baby. I'll be right here when you come out." "I promise." I kissed her forehead, handed her the raccoon, and watched as she followed the nurse down a hallway painted with cartoon animals. The doors swung closed, and suddenly I was alone. The minutes crawled by, the only sound the hum of the soda machine and the occasional crackle of the intercom. My phone sat silent in my lap, not a single message from Helen or Chelsea. Even Rebecca's number felt too heavy to dial. I stared at the linoleum floor, counting the flecks in the tile, wondering if I'd made the right call. The guilt pressed in from all sides, doing everything by the book, following every rule, yet feeling more lost than ever. Had I protected Rosie, or had I made her world scarier? Would she blame me for this: the cold exam room, the strange faces, the separation? A nurse walked by, offering a sympathetic smile I couldn't return. My mind spun. Would my family ever forgive me? Did forgiveness even matter if Rosie was safe? I thought of every time I'd been told, as a child, to keep quiet, to let things go. How easy it would be to stay silent, to slip back into old patterns. But I couldn't. Not now. I tried to call Rebecca, but the call went to voicemail. My voice shook as I left a message. "We're at the hospital. They're with Rosie now." I did everything you said. I hope it was right. Outside, the world was still. No sirens, no shouting, just the slow hush of night settling over the parking lot. The weight of everything hit me at once, and I pressed my hands to my face, willing myself not to cry. I looked up when the door opened and saw Ms. Alvarez approaching, her expression soft but serious. "She's almost done, Margot. She did really well. We'll talk in a few minutes." I nodded, wiping my cheeks, bracing myself for whatever came next. Rosie would come back to me, but I knew things would never be the same. Not for her, not for me, not for any of us. Sitting in that hospital hallway, phone silent and hope flickering, I wondered, had I shattered our family, or had I finally set us free? Nothing prepares you for how much proof you'll need to defend a child's pain. In my worst dreams, I thought the truth would speak for itself, that anyone would see what I saw in Rosie's haunted eyes. But in the morning light, back in my apartment, away from the storm of the night before, I learned the world demands paperwork, timelines, neat stacks of evidence. Rebecca's words echoed in my head: "Keep every drawing, every message. The world demands evidence, not just stories. I gathered Rosie's crumpled artwork from her backpack, the stick figures, the angry red lines, the drawings I'd once brushed off as the scribbles of an imaginative little girl. Now each page was a lifeline. Rebecca met me at her law office that afternoon, her calm a steadying presence in a world gone sideways. Her desk was already covered in folders, colored sticky notes, and her ever-present mug of tea. "We'll start with the basics," she said, her voice gentle but urgent. "I need every piece of evidence you have, texts, emails, anything Rosie's drawn or said about Travis. The more we show a pattern, the harder it will be to dismiss her as just difficult." I fumbled through my bag, handing over stacks of pages, the printouts of emails I'd sent Helen and Chelsea, the notes from Rosie's teachers. Rebecca sorted them methodically, labeling each as she went. "I'll need access to your phone records and the voice memo app, too," she added. My hands shook as I found the recording, the one Rosie's tablet had captured by accident. Travis's voice, low and unmistakable. "If you say anything, you'll make everything worse." I felt sick just replaying it, but Rebecca's face hardened with determination. "This is important, Margot. This changes everything." The paperwork was endless. Forms for emergency custody, statements for child protective services, releases for medical records, consent for interviews, authorizations I never imagined I'd sign. Each document felt like another small step away from the life I thought I had, and another step towards something I couldn't see yet, just a hope that the system would protect Rosie the way I could not. Meanwhile, life went on. Mr. Calvin from Rosie's school called to report changes in her behavior, withdrawn at recess, skittish in the halls, startled by loud noises. "We're doing what we can to make her feel safe, Ms. Parker," he assured me. "But she's not herself." His concern was real, but I heard the careful distance in his voice. He, too, needed the facts, the paperwork, the right boxes checked. CPS scheduled interviews, first with me, then with Rosie. I sat in a stuffy office while a caseworker with tired eyes asked about my parenting, my job, my relationship with Helen. The questions felt invasive. Did I ever leave Rosie alone with Travis? Had I noticed changes in her appetite, sleep, schoolwork? I answered everything, even when the answers made me feel like I'd failed as a mother. Rosie met separately with another caseworker, a soft-spoken woman with a gentle smile. I waited outside the door, my stomach in knots, praying Rosie would feel safe enough to tell her truth. When they finally emerged, Rosie's eyes were red but dry. She wrapped her arms around my waist and didn't let go. Rebecca called later that evening. "We have what we need for court," she said. "The drawings, the medical notes, the audio. It's enough to get emergency custody and to force the court to listen to Rosie's side. But it won't be easy, Margot. Helen and Chelsea will fight back. Travis's lawyer will attack your character. You need to be ready for a long haul." I stared at the pile of papers spread across my table, evidence of pain, of courage, of everything I never wanted to prove. For a moment, it all felt impossible. But then I saw Rosie curled up on the couch, her raccoon plush tucked under her chin, and I knew there was no other choice. Justice in America is a long paper trail, not just wounds or words, but the proof you can hold up to the light. I pressed my thumb to another form, signed my name, and prepared for the fight of our lives. By the next Sunday, rumors swirled faster than the coffee percolating in the back of the church hall. In a town like ours, news didn't just travel. It spread like dandelion seeds on a windy day, carried by whispers, colored by bias, and impossible to contain once let loose. I felt it first at the grocery store. The usual gentle nods were missing. Conversations hushed as I passed down the canned goods aisle. Two women I'd known since high school pretended not to see me. The cashier's smile was brittle, his eyes skating away from mine as he scanned Rosie's cereal box. Rosie clung to my side, her small fingers gripping the hem of my coat, eyes searching for a familiar face that would meet her gaze. The same cold current followed us everywhere. At school, Rosie's teacher met my updates with careful neutrality. On the playground, I saw Rosie standing alone by the fence, tracing shapes in the dirt with the toe of her sneaker. Her friends gathered in a circle several yards away, glancing over their shoulders, giggling behind cupped hands. At home, she asked in a quiet voice, "Mommy, did I do something bad?" I reassured her, again and again, that she did nothing wrong, but in small towns, the lines between guilt and innocence blur in the court of public opinion. It didn't matter that we followed every rule, did everything by the book. What mattered was that I'd broken the silence, pulled aside the curtain everyone else preferred to keep closed. Helen stopped going to church out of shame. She'd always been proud of her place in the congregation, singing in the choir, organizing bake sales, carrying casseroles to the sick and grieving. Now she sat at home on Sundays, curtains drawn, phone off the hook. When I called, she let it ring. At church, Pastor Dennis delivered a sermon about forgiveness and unity, his eyes never meeting mine, but his words heavy with implication. We are called, he intoned, to remember that no one is above making mistakes and that families must pull together in difficult times, not apart. The congregation murmured their agreement, casting sidelong glances in my direction. I felt their judgment settle over me like a scratchy wool blanket. Even Mrs. Jennings, who had once patted Rosie's curls and slipped her cookies after Sunday service, kept her distance at first. I'd catch her watching us from her porch across the street, arms crossed, lips tight, her usual friendly wave withheld. The mail came less often, and when it did, it sometimes included in signed notes. Think of the children. Don't destroy what's left. The unspoken message was clear. This wasn't just about our family, but the fabric of the entire community. One afternoon, a petition arrived. Neighbors' signatures lined the page, a polite but pointed demand for further investigation, a clear challenge to my integrity as a mother. The words were couched in concern, but the message was unmistakable. We don't trust you, not anymore. I stood on the porch, petition in hand, feeling smaller than I had since childhood. Rosie's world shrank, too. She stopped asking for sleepovers, stopped volunteering to lead the pledge at school. Even her drawings changed, fewer rainbows and smiling faces, more solitary figures and gray clouds. At night, she curled against me, seeking comfort in the familiar rhythm of my heartbeat. "Will it ever be normal again?" she whispered. I had no answer. Then, as dusk settled one evening, a knock sounded at our door. I opened it to find Mrs. Jennings standing on the stoop, her hands wrapped in a dish towel, a warm pie cradled in her arms. She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes softer than I'd seen in weeks. She didn't say much, just, "I believe you," in a voice so quiet I almost missed it. She pressed the pie into my hands and gave Rosie a gentle, reassuring smile before turning back down the steps. For a few seconds, I stood there stunned, holding that pie as if it were proof that hope could still grow in even the coldest soil. In that small gesture, a neighbor's kindness, the willingness to see past gossip, I felt something shift. Maybe not forgiveness, not yet. But the faintest promise that someday, this town might remember how to do more than just protect its secrets. Rebecca warned me, more than once, One wrong move and you might never get Rosie back. The words echoed in my mind as I sat in the waiting area of family court, knees bouncing, hands cold. The air buzzed with nervous energy, lawyers pacing, parents whispering anxiously to their advocates. I looked at Rosie beside me, small and brave in her neat dress, clinging to her raccoon plush like a talisman. I never imagined it would come to this. I remembered my divorce hearing, how quickly love turned to litigation, how easily the language of care soured into the language of accusation. But this was a different magnitude. This was the battle for my daughter's future. The courtroom itself felt sterile, almost unfriendly, as we filed in and took our seats. Rebecca sat beside me, a quiet rock amid my nerves. Across the aisle, Travis appeared with his attorney, face blank, jaw set. Chelsea and Helen slipped in behind, their faces drawn and pale. I wondered if Helen would meet my eyes. She didn't. The hearing began, motions, introductions, the judge's calm explanations. Travis's lawyer wasted no time. She stood, sharp in her suit, and began a steady assault. Your Honor, Ms. Parker has orchestrated a campaign of alienation, undermining Rosie's relationship with her extended family and especially with my client. There is evidence of emotional manipulation. This child is not abused. She is being used in a family dispute. I felt the heat in my cheeks, the sting of injustice. Rebecca squeezed my arm. Wait, let her finish. I bit my tongue. Rebecca's turn came, and she rose, voice steady, presenting each piece of evidence like laying bricks in a wall. The drawings, the doctor's reports, Rosie's own recorded words, the testimony of Mr. Calvin, and the voice memo from the tablet. This is not alienation, Your Honor. This is protection. Ms. Parker took action because no one else would. The judge asked his questions, probing each side. My answers were brief, honest, sometimes trembling. When it was Helen's turn, she looked so small on the witness stand. She said she loved both her daughters. She said she didn't want to believe something so dark could happen under her roof, but she couldn't ignore what she'd seen, the fear in Rosie's eyes, the changes no one could explain away. Chelsea wept openly, wringing her hands. I don't know who to believe, she admitted, voice raw. I just want us to be a family again. I want my sister and my niece. I want things back the way they were. But there was no going back, and everyone in the room seemed to know it. The judge called a brief recess. During the break, I felt the weight of every gaze in the hallway, community members, old neighbors, people who'd known me since I was a child. Their eyes held sympathy, suspicion, even fear. The judge returned and read his ruling in a measured tone. Given the evidence and the best interests of the child, Rosie will remain with her mother, Ms. Parker, under CPS supervision pending further hearings and investigation. The room let out a collective exhale. Rebecca nodded at me, a silent encouragement to stay strong, to keep fighting. Travis's lawyer frowned, but Travis himself didn't even look at me. Chelsea's shoulders slumped in relief, or maybe exhaustion. Helen, on the other hand, hesitated at the back of the courtroom, waiting as the crowd trickled out. Outside, the day was cloudy, humid, a weight in the air. As I gathered Rosie's bag and prepared to leave, Helen reached for my hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong, but her face was etched with pain. I'm so sorry, Margot, she whispered, voice barely audible. But I'm scared. I don't know what to do anymore. I don't know how to help. I squeezed her hand, feeling the sharp divide of generations, love and fear that ran through us. We do the best we can, Mom. We stand up even when we're scared. Helen nodded, tears shining in her eyes. For a moment, we were just mother and daughter again, both terrified, both hoping to do what was right, even as the world around us felt ready to judge. As we drove away, I caught Rosie's reflection in the rearview mirror. Quiet, solemn, eyes big with questions she was too tired to ask. I wished I could promise her that justice would be simple, that doing the right thing would always feel good. But justice, I'd learned, wasn't just about right and wrong. It was about who had the courage to stand up again and again, no matter how afraid. For the first time, Rosie looked up at me, shoulders squared, her small chin trembling, and said, "I want to tell what happened, even if it's hard." I'd waited months for her to feel safe enough to say those words, and now that they were here, I was the one who felt unsteady. The old ache of wishing I could protect her from everything pulsed inside me. But this time, I understood. She needed to speak for herself. We sat together in the child therapist's office, a gentle space with faded green walls and shelves full of plush toys, worn picture books, and baskets of crayons. The therapist, Dr. Marsh, spoke in a voice just above a whisper, making the whole world seem softer. Rosie sat cross-legged on the rug, hugging her raccoon and quietly arranging blocks into careful rows. Dr. Marsh didn't push. Instead, she invited Rosie to draw or build or play, whatever felt right. At first, Rosie just drew rainbows and houses, the way she always had. But as the days passed, her pictures changed. A girl in a chair with red marks, a figure with angry eyebrows standing in the doorway, a mother's arms stretched wide. When Dr. Marsh asked gentle questions, Rosie answered in small pieces, her words halting but clear. "I was scared," she said once, eyes fixed on the floor. "I tried to be good and not move. He said I'd ruin everything if I told." My heart twisted, hearing it out loud, what I'd only ever guessed from her silence, her drawings, her nightmares. Dr. Marsh nodded and never looked away. "That was very brave to say, Rosie," she assured her. "You didn't do anything wrong." Rebecca came by the office, paperwork in hand, gathering Rosie's drawings and the therapist's notes as evidence. I could see the respect in Rebecca's face, not just for the legal importance of Rosie's words, but for the courage it took to speak them. "Sometimes, Margot, the best witness is the one no one thought would ever find her voice," she said quietly as we walked to the car. The day of the closed session arrived like a storm. We waited in a family meeting room at the courthouse, everything beige and hushed. Rosie wore her favorite cardigan, the blue one with missing buttons, and clutched her raccoon so tightly I worried it might fall apart. CPS had explained what would happen. The judge would meet with Rosie in private, ask her some questions, let her say what she wanted. No lawyers, no parents, just a safe space for the truth. Before she went in, Rosie turned to me. "Mommy, will you wait right here?" I knelt, hugged her, and promised I would. I kissed the top of her head and smoothed her hair, wishing I could go with her. But this, I realized, was her moment. The wait was unbearable. I stared at the blank walls, listening to the tick of the clock, replaying every memory, every time I'd doubted myself, every time I'd worried I was making things worse. Rebecca sat beside me, silent but solid. I squeezed her hand once, both of us knowing that nothing we could do now would matter more than Rosie's truth. When the door finally opened, Rosie emerged, eyes wide but dry. The judge followed, his voice gentle as he thanked her and led her back to me. Rosie climbed into my lap, silent at first, then whispered. "He asked me if I felt safe with you." I told him I do. I said I want to stay with my mom. My breath caught. I held her close, trying not to cry, not now, not in front of her. Rebecca's phone buzzed before we even left the courthouse. She checked the message, brow furrowing in concentration. "The judge will issue a preliminary ruling in 24 hours, she told me. "That's sooner than we expected." I nodded, feeling both relief and new anxiety take root. All I could do was hold Rosie, trace circles on her back, and whisper how proud I was of her. Whatever the ruling, Rosie had done the bravest thing anyone could ask. She'd spoken her truth, and the world had listened. That night, as Rosie fell asleep in my arms, I found myself thinking about all the ways adults fail children, not because we don't love them, but because we're too quick to explain, too slow to believe, too afraid of rocking the boat. It took all my strength to listen without looking away. I knew now that sometimes the greatest act of love is simply to hear the truth and let it change you. Word spreads in small towns the way a ripple moves across a still lake, slow at first, then impossible to ignore. I noticed it in the smallest ways, the mailman meeting my eyes with a nod, a neighbor waving from her porch instead of ducking inside, and one afternoon, a plate of oatmeal cookies left on our steps with no note, still warm under the kitchen towel. It wasn't an apology, not quite, but it was something, a beginning. For months, I'd felt the hush that followed us everywhere, at the grocery store, in the church parking lot, at the schoolyard. Now it started to shift. Rosie's return to school was met with quiet curiosity, some awkwardness, but also moments of kindness. A classmate offered her a red marker. Another invited her to join a jump rope game at recess. Small, simple things, but after so much silence, they felt monumental. Mrs. Jennings became the first to break the pattern of avoidance. At a community meeting, one of those potluck and coffee affairs where everyone pretends they have nothing to say, she stood up, voice steadier than I expected. She spoke about her own childhood, how she'd once carried a secret for years because no one asked the right questions. "Sometimes," she said, glancing in my direction, "all it takes is one person brave enough to speak first. The rest of us, we just need to listen." There was a hush, then a gentle murmur of agreement. I realized in that moment how hungry everyone was for permission to care out loud. Even Pastor Dennis, who'd avoided my eyes for weeks, asked if he could stop by our house. He apologized for his lack of compassion. "It's easier to preach about forgiveness than to practice it, Margot," he admitted, shoulders slumped. "I'm sorry for not supporting you when you needed it." Helen's journey back to me was harder, messier, but she made it. At church that Sunday, her hand shook as she walked to the front of the congregation. I could see how hard she fought the urge to shrink back, but she stood her ground. Her voice was thin, but strong enough to carry, "We need to do better for all our children. For Rosie. For Margot. For any child who's ever been afraid to tell the truth." The room was silent for a long moment. Then, in ones and twos, people began to nod. I caught the eye of Mr. Calvin, Rosie's principal, who gave me a quiet, reassuring thumbs up from the back pew. Even some of the women who'd gossiped the loudest offered tentative smiles. After the service, a few more neighbors stopped by with small offerings, a loaf of bread, a jar of preserves, a handwritten note folded and tucked under a pie plate. "You're not alone. We're with you now." I saved every note in a shoebox under my bed, evidence that hope, like pain, could be shared. Rosie, sensing the difference, grew lighter. Her laughter returned, tentative at first, then bubbling out in fits of giggles as she played hopscotch with her friends. The haunted look faded from her eyes. She told me one night, "I think people aren't as scared to talk to us anymore." I kissed her forehead and told her, That's because you helped them be brave. Helen came by more often, helping with dinner, folding laundry, reading to Rosie. We didn't speak much about what had happened, but she apologized in 100 quiet ways, a hand on my back as I cooked, a soft "I'm proud of you" as she left for the evening. The community, I realized, was not healed, but healing. There was still pain, still doubt, but also a sense of new beginnings. We were learning, together, to build something stronger than the secrets that had once kept us apart. Then, one late afternoon, as golden light slanted through the kitchen, an envelope arrived in the mail. The return address was stamped from the county courthouse. My hands trembled as I slid it open, Rosie watching from across the table. Final court date set, it read in bold letters. The outcome would determine everything. I folded the letter, heart pounding, and met Rosie's eyes. Whatever happens, we'll face it together, I promised. For the first time in a long while, I believed it. The courthouse always smelled like lemon polish and nerves. I could feel the shine on the banisters as I ran my hand along them, Rosie's small palm pressed into mine. The morning was gray and cool. Every footstep echoed, the sound magnified by anxiety. Today, everything might change. Or nothing might. I tried not to let Rosie see my hands shaking. Rebecca met us at the front doors, her suit pressed, her hair in its usual no-nonsense bun. "Ready?" she asked, voice quiet, warm. I nodded, but the word felt heavy. "No matter the verdict," she whispered, "Rosie knows you fought for her." That mattered more than any piece of paper the judge could sign. The courtroom was crowded with faces, some familiar, some not. Helen sat behind me, clutching a handkerchief, her face pale but determined. Chelsea was beside her, avoiding my eyes. Travis sat at the opposite table, his lawyer perched beside him, eyes sharp as knives. Rosie stayed close to me, hugging her raccoon plush until its seams threatened to burst. Proceedings began, and the judge, a woman with gentle eyes but a stern mouth, called us to order. The county seal glimmered on the wall behind her, silent witness to stories of heartache and hope. Rebecca presented our case first. She spoke clearly, compassion threaded through every fact, Rosie's drawings, each one marked with fear and hope. Dr. Marsh's notes from therapy, soft but undeniable. Mrs. Jennings was called as a witness. She told the court what she'd seen, her voice never wavering as she described the changes she'd noticed in Rosie, the way the child flinched from Travis, the night she'd brought a pie and found us in tears. Travis's lawyer pounced on me, her words icy. She questioned my character, my parenting. Wasn't I overly sensitive? Hadn't I alienated Rosie from her own family? I answered as best I could, honestly, steadily, even when my throat tightened and my eyes stung. Every accusation felt personal, but I refused to back down. Helen's turn came. She stood, voice shaking but words clear. I was wrong, she told the judge. I doubted my own daughter. I doubted my granddaughter. But Margot is a good mother. Rosie is safe with her. That is what matters now. Rebecca's closing statement was brief, but I felt every word. This is not just about custody, she said, voice rising in the still room. It's about truth. It's about a community finding the courage to listen, to believe, to protect. Margot has done everything a mother should do, and more. We ask for justice, not only for Rosie, but for every child who needs a champion. The judge listened, hands folded. Silence pulsed in the room. When her verdict finally came, I realized I'd been holding my breath for months, not just minutes. I find in favor of Margot Evers, she said, voice ringing. Full custody of Rosie is awarded to her mother. A permanent restraining order is granted against Travis Sinclair. Further investigation into his conduct will proceed. The gavel fell, sharp and final. I didn't realize I was crying until Rosie's arms tightened around my waist. Tears slipped down my face, relief and grief mixed with gratitude, so strong it almost hurt. Helen sobbed behind me, and Mrs. Jennings covered her mouth, eyes shining. As we left the courtroom, the hallway seemed brighter, less oppressive. Rebecca hugged me, a rare thing, and whispered, "You did it." Helen caught my shoulder, whispering, "I'm sorry. I love you both. I'll spend the rest of my life proving it." Outside, Rosie slipped her hand into mine. Her voice was small but steady. "Are we safe now, Mommy?" I knelt so we were face to face, my tears falling onto her cheeks. For the first time, I could say, "Yes, sweetheart. We are." Rosie smiled, and in that smile, I saw the promise of healing, the quiet beginning of something new. The first morning in our new place, Rosie woke before the sun. She stood at my bedside in her soft pajamas, hair still tousled from sleep, and whispered, "Is this what safe feels like, Mommy?" There was a hush in her voice, uncertainty mixed with wonder. For a long moment, I just listened to the quiet. No heavy footsteps overhead, no late-night arguments through thin walls. No fear that the phone would ring with bad news. Only the sound of Rosie's breathing and the gentle tick of the kitchen clock. I pulled her under the covers and we lay there together, watching the sunlight climb slowly up the wall. "Yes, sweetheart," I told her, and this time I meant it. "We're safe now." The apartment is nothing fancy, a little two-bedroom with linoleum floors and a small patch of backyard that catches the afternoon sun, but it feels like a palace. Rosie has her own room, a soft blue rug, and walls slowly filling up with new drawings. Sunflowers, bright yellow and strong, dance across the paper. Every week she tapes up another, rainbows, laughing faces, wide blue skies. The darkness that once crept into her pictures has been chased out by color and light. We planted a tiny garden by the fence, zinnias, marigolds, a hopeful row of carrots that Rosie waters each evening with a plastic cup. She names every flower, whispering encouragements as if coaxing them to grow. Some afternoons, she sits on the stoop with a sketchbook and draws what she sees, bees on blossoms, birds on the wire, the world remade one gentle detail at a time. Helen comes over for dinner most Sundays, arms full of groceries and apologies she no longer needs to say. We cook together, laughing at old stories and swapping recipes. The first time Mrs. Jennings joined us, she brought a lemon pie and a bouquet of daisies. We set the table in the little kitchen, and for the first time in years, I felt the warmth of belonging, not forced, not conditional, but real. After dinner, Helen and I sit on the porch with our coffee, watching Rosie chase fireflies in the yard. There's a quiet between us that's comfortable now, a soft truce, a mutual gratitude for having come through the storm together. She squeezes my hand, eyes shining, and says, "You saved her, Margot. You saved both of you." I shake my head and smile. We saved each other. Mr. Calvin, Rosie's principal, drops by with a note. "Rosie is thriving. Keep up the art." It's a small thing, but it means the world. Rosie returns to art class, and for the first time in months, I see her running to greet a new friend. Their laughter is loud and full, echoing across the playground. Some days are still hard. Nightmares come less often, but sometimes Rosie climbs into my bed, seeking comfort. I hold her and hum an old lullaby until she falls asleep. Healing isn't a straight line, it bends and doubles back, but every day, we take another step forward. As the weeks go by, the apartment fills with life. The smell of cookies baking, the sound of crayons scraping, the steady rhythm of routines that once felt so far out of reach. We host a little dinner for our new friends, Mrs. Jennings, Helen, and even Mr. Calvin, who brings a bouquet of sunflowers from the school garden. We eat, talk, and celebrate small victories. One evening, as the sun sets in streaks of gold and lavender, Rosie curls up beside me on the porch swing. She rests her head on my shoulder, arms wrapped tight around my waist. "I'm glad you didn't give up on me," she says quietly. Tears prickle at my eyes, but I keep my voice steady. "I never could, Rosie. Not ever." Later, after Rosie is asleep, I stand by the window and look out at the lights twinkling across our neighborhood. The sky is wide, the world is quiet, and I realize that home isn't a place. It's the courage to build safety and love, no matter what storms rage outside. It's the promise I make to Rosie and to myself every single day. I am Margot, who has lived the story from the first difficult days to the last peaceful moment. Looking back on my journey with my daughter, I realized sometimes home is not where we grow up, but where we are brave enough to protect the safety and trust of the people we love the most. Perhaps what moves me the most is the power of listening and daring to speak up. We grow up in houses full of secrets, where sometimes the pain is hidden just because of the two words family. But then I learned that sometimes we have to accept being misunderstood, even isolated, so that our children can be truly protected. That is also how we rewrite the definition of family, with courage and tolerance. What about you? Have you ever felt lost among your loved ones? Have you ever been forced to make a difficult decision, even though you knew it would hurt someone, just to protect what is right? Please share your feelings below. I look forward to hearing everyone's story, because I believe, somewhere in us, we have all gone through stormy seasons like that. If my mother and I's journey makes you think back to your own family or evokes a certain memory, don't hesitate to leave comment number 1 or let me know where you are. Maybe someone reading this will find sympathy. If you love gentle but profound stories like this, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next shares. Being able to accompany you on each journey is a joy, a gratitude that I never take lightly. Thank you for patiently listening and accompanying throughout this long 16-chapter journey. I hope you always keep the warm fire in your heart, no matter how many winters pass by. See you again in another story or in the comments section below.